Our defensive posture was typically at the network layer, where if you think about Fort Knox, right? Or where does the US keep their treasure in gold? They keep it at Fort Knox. So they have a perimeter security around there where, if you get within 100 feet of the perimeter of that physical structure, they're notified, right? And then there's another layer, there's barbed wire and fencing, and then there's probably some other trip wires, and there's layer after layer after layer of physical security. And that's traditionally how we've looked at the network. Even though the network is not necessarily physical, we put in firewalls, we've put in VPNs, we've put in barriers to disallow connections. And what we found is there are so many vulnerabilities out there in the various products that people use. Cisco has vulnerabilities, even though they're probably, the best networking organization in the world. There are vulnerabilities out there that people discover, and then they try to use those vulnerabilities to get in. The industry has shifted over to what's really about more of the human factor, which is, are you who you say you are? Let's assume that you can get past that perimeter security, because there are so many anomalies in the layers and layers of protection that we put in place. The next logical step is to look at the people, the human identity, and verify and validate the human identity. Then comes MFA, a second layer of protection that guards against you accessing the gold mine, right? Or the system, or the data, or the products. So identity and access management is that second and tertiary layer beyond the physical perimeter or the network perimeter. Now we're protecting the identity of the individual, because that's really where the keys to the kingdom reside, is with the individual. What identity and access management does is it looks at all those other layers that are already in place, the network layer, and it adds a couple more layers of protection to ensure you are who you say you are. You might see a second factor with a thumbprint or a fingerprint, or an app on your phone where it cycles through a series of digits, and those digits are only valid for a 15-second period, and you have to time it so that put them in at the right time. In addition to that, identity and access management makes sure that you only really have access to what you need to do your job. So that's essentially the other layer that we're trying to protect on the back end or within the systems, is not only have you proven who you say you are, but really I'm only going to give you access to the things that you absolutely need. All the other stuff is going to be protected, or you can't edit policies, right? You can see the policies, you can download the policies, but you can't edit them how they're presented. There's a saying out in the security community that identity is the new perimeter. Tagline on how the security industry, or how the cybersecurity industry, is seeing identity and access management. Well, hopefully they see it as all three, and there's varying degrees, to what degree, depending on what you're trying to protect. In the banking and finance, you want layers of protection in all three of those elements. You want the physical security, you want the network security, and you want the identity security. I hope that when executives are thinking about this in terms of, it's like the Fort Knox scenario again. It's, there's physical barriers to prevent people from crashing the gate and busting in and physically accessing it. But there's also other network layers of protection that only allow certain individuals with the right IDs and the right fingerprints to get into various layers. Well, then on top of that, the systems are protecting only certain individual IDs, and authorizations in the network are allowed to access the data that tells you where the gold is in the physical building. So hopefully executives are looking at all three of those elements and making sure that they have multiple layers of protection within each one of those, both the physical, the virtual, and the network, especially with cloud, right? Cloud kind of virtualizes everything, and you may or may not be thinking about those new layers of protection where identity is more important than physical access. It's not like, physical access to the gold anymore. Really, all you need is physical access to the data, a bank account, a routing number, an access ID, a password, and maybe access to someone's phone, those kinds of things. So you've got to protect those. So we no longer have kind of the castle and moat scenario. Our people and data are everywhere. So attackers know the easiest way in is to steal someone's account. They have a very heavy reliance on IT to know all and be all in terms of security. And they may or may not be. IT is busy. The light bulb that I see turn on with executives is when we do an assessment is IT is really good at what they do. They may not be aware of their own blind spots, or they may not be aware that marketing has purchased an application and they're using that application and moving data back and forth. IT isn't going to necessarily know that. Security and compliance should know that, because they should know the ingress and the egress of all your data points. All the paths where data goes in and data goes out should be visible to security folks. IT is really a business enabler. They're busy fixing stuff. They don't necessarily have the time. They're generally overworked. I don't know if they're underpaid, but they're generally overworked. And when there's a fire, they're expected to spend time on the fire. So they don't really have time, not because they don't want to, they just don't have time. Really think about the context of security and how all those layers of protection are necessary and how they can blend together to enable the business, as opposed, make things faster as opposed to making things more difficult. There's a lot of industries out there. There's the medical industry, there's finance industry, there's banking, there's credit unions, there's manufacturing. They all have their little nuances in terms of where their weak spots are generally located. So industry accepted security compliance rules for all those industries. And really, when we use iComply, we look at the industry our clients are in, and then we look at aligning them to the proper compliance framework. And when we align them to that compliance framework, because that framework is developed with that particular industry in mind, we can focus our energy on that specific industry, and we get to see where they are in the context of their peers and where they are in the context of overall security. So those compliance standards that are out there, in terms of the FDIC, FFIEC, NCUA, all those NIST rules, we get to contextualize that and paint a picture with iComply so that they can really see where they are, and they can make their own calls on what they're willing to accept in terms of risk. But until we get in there and show them that, they don't really know where those blind spots are in their industry. Well, there's a couple. There's a technology layer there that's scanning and interpreting the network layers and reviewing their network maps and understanding how they contextualize connectivity in terms of what does their network look like? What's the health of their network? Are they on the latest patches? How are they using patch management? We look at all those layers and contextualize it in terms of the compliance framework that their industry is in. So we're able to look at them in the context of their peers and their industry and tell them where their weak spots are. We'll generally look for, like if you're a manufacturing, we look for a lot of operating systems that are out there, maybe on the manufacturing floor. In finance, we look for identity and access control holes or blind spots. In the medical, we look for data access blind spots. Do people have access to only what they need to get their jobs done? Can they exfiltrate data about people or individuals or accounts or health information? Because if they can, in all likelihood, they will. Maybe not intentionally, but unintentionally. And that's really where we step in and we're able to orchestrate all those layers of connectivity and access control and paint the different scenarios of where those blind spots could surface and cause them problems in the future. We try to get to those ahead of time. And that's what iComply does, is it gives us that visibility. Just like an MRI gives a doctor a visibility into the human body in different aspects, right? In different layers. It uses magnetic resonance to look at your heart function, your circulatory functions, your bone structure, right? And they can tell a lot. iComply is kind of like the MRI, the Siemens MRI system in healthcare. We're really taking a deep look at how all these things are working together in terms of the industry they're in. So an MRI kind of looks at your body and looks at the functions. And if we have a specific area in the brain in an MRI, we may actually look at the manufacturing floor in manufacturing. It's completely transparent to the individual. They don't even know they're part of it. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes there's a real pain in the tail sometimes when things go wrong, but it should be transparent to the actual end user. When they need access to something, they should have it. They shouldn't have to jump through hoops to go get it. It should automatically be there, or there should be an automated way for them to request it, get it approved, and move on with their work. That's how security can enable the business, is making sure that these processes are not barriers, but they're transparent to the end user. That's what success looks like when we take those blind spots and we get those addressed so that the end user doesn't really even see them. That's really the business outcome we're looking for, is transparency, right? We don't want them to know that they're having to jump through these other hoops. They just want to get their job done, and they don't want IT in the way, and they don't want security in the way. So if we can get rid of that tagline of being the Department of No in security, then we're successful. What AI can help us do is speed up the response process. It can help us look for holes in or blind spots at a faster pace. It can help identify when people are having a difficult time so we can get rid of those barriers more effectively and efficiently. There's no need to wait for a week and a half for the security team to realize somebody doesn't have access. But what happens a lot is IT gets the ticket and they troubleshoot it, and they sit there and spin their wheels, and they're really just trying to get their job done and get access to the person, get them access to what they need. But by the time it gets to security, it could be 3 or 4 days. And that's really frustrating for the end user. So what AI can help us do is troubleshoot those more effectively and efficiently and recover faster. So there's a thing called MTTR, mean time to resolution. We can leverage AI tools, to reduce that mean time to resolution for individuals. And again, we do that by being transparent. They shouldn't even know we're there. Specific to identity and access management, it requires a little bit of groundwork for us to understand and for iComply to really add value. There's an assessment process to collect that information, analyze it in the context of their industry, where are their peers in terms of their security score. If it's a specific problem, we can help them get that addressed. But that problem came up likely as a result of a blind spot, because had they known about it, they would have had it addressed ahead of time, if you can predict that. So what we're trying to do is move from this reactive status of IT and security to a more proactive role. When we are able to get in there and do a framework assessment, we can expose those things and predict where they're going to have problems, so that they can decide, is that important enough that when the rubber hits the road and that problem starts to materialize, do they want to address that ahead of time, or are they okay with waiting for it to happen? Then they're smarter from a business terminology or a business perspective. They can predict those outcomes. And when we can predict outcomes, we enable the business to run at a much faster speed. There's a little bit of influence from every one of those. But in addition, it's primarily process failure, is not really truly understanding the process from start to finish of what identity and access management really is. It's not just automating a user ID. There's more to it than that. There's, on the back end, it's making sure that you've got the right structures in place with group identity, so that when you're added to a group, you don't get access to the wrong information or access that you don't need to do your job. A lot of times when people are, caught downloading stuff, they're just trying to get their job done. They're really not, generally speaking, intentionally exfiltrating data. They're just trying to download it to a spreadsheet because they know spreadsheets and that's how they can work. So they're trying to pull that data in so they can get their job done and run a report. So it's not always because there's a maniacal twist to what they're trying to achieve. It's usually because they're just trying to get their jobs done. There are plenty of examples out there where IAM could have identity and access management, or even a low mature rating of identity and access management program could have prevented either a breach or an embarrassment or fraud. One that comes to mind now that I'm talking about it is in identity and access management, there's all kinds of different ways for us to identify who you are and validate that you are who you say you are. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're in a financial institution and you're logging in and you're moving money. You're requesting an ACH to move $1,000 from bank account A to bank account B. You log in, we see patterns of behavior where you log in from Chicago, Illinois, every 2 or 3 days, and we see that pattern, right? That's part of our identity and access management would identify that you're logging in from a certain zip code or an IP address. And all of a sudden, you start logging in from Spain, or you start logging in from what we call impossible login spots. You log in from Alaska, and then 20 minutes later, you're logging in from Florida. Those are red flags where we've looked at your identity, we know your behavioral patterns, and we can raise a flag before we allow you to move that money to validate and verify through a text message to your phone or a personal contact that you are who you say you are, and those are legitimate logins. Maybe you've authorized somebody to log in on your behalf in Florida. That's fine. That's really not our business. What is our business is protecting you from that fraud. And when we collect data when you log in, that tells us a pattern. So that identity and access management log data can be used to prevent fraud in that context. I mean, that's a specific example where when I worked with a client, we implemented that very strategy where we identified patterns of behavior through our logging mechanism and what's called our SIM. And anytime we saw what we determined is an impossible login, where you can't physically travel from Alaska to Florida in 20 minutes, but yet your account, who has a pattern of logging in from Alaska, even down to the city, we can do that, not just the state. When we see an abnormal pattern, we can raise a yellow flag, maybe not a red flag, so that someone looks a little bit deeper into it. Get an assessment done by a third party so that you know where your blind spots are. Then you can determine what risk you want to accept and what risk you don't. But if you don't know where your blind spots are, you don't have a third party actively providing you that information and educating you that this could potentially be a problem, it's a total blind spot. And that's how fraud happens in the financial industry. That's how denial of service attacks happen in manufacturing. That's how data gets exfiltrated in healthcare systems. So if you don't know what those blind spots are, you can't make a business decision to say, well, what's it going to cost me to reduce that risk, eliminate the risk, or get it done in a phased approach where, maybe we spend $20,000 on it this year and $30,000 next year, but at least we're making progress and we're aware of it. It's not about just putting the Band-Aid on and moving on. It's really about that assessment, that third-party assessment, illustrating those things that you need to think about bigger picture and longer term. And while you're doing that, you can enable the business at a faster pace. That's my tagline is cybersecurity at the speed of business. Because without that knowledge, you can't make informed decisions. You might see what's popular and the business wants to do X, Y, Z, but if you don't see those blind spots before they actually hit you, you're not going to be the hero that you want to be. You're going to be the zero, and somebody's going to be in the hot seat. So my overwhelming recommendation is that you get a third-party analysis by someone who can articulate specifically what the problem is and how to fix it, and how much it's going to cost in terms of people and capital to get that fixed, or to Band-Aid it, or decide not to do anything. Then you can contextualize your risk, you can quantify it, and you can make smart business decisions about those blind spots.